It matters not that the headstone isn't there. Soon it will be. What matters is how we remember the man and what he did. Beneath every stone is a story to be told, a love for the past, and years devoted to remembering those who live on only in the memory of the ones who care. Edmond relived these stories in his portrayal of the many whose graves he stood next to, and reminds us that we never know what time we have left.
Bonjour, mes amis. Please allow me to introduce myself. I am Shawn Gill, but you may know me as the Hermit of Deer Isle, a title given to me by my good friend, Captain Louis Gonflot. But to me, the title never suited me. It's not that I dislike it, you see. It is not quite a true reflection of my life and personality. When I reflect on my life, I might just as easily have been known as the entrepreneur of Deer Isle, or even the Casanova of Deer Isle. I was married a few times, you know. You see, I work good with the men, but I love the ladies. Oh well, I put the cart before the horse. I came to the Bahamas from my native country of France when I was 22 years old. The year was 1900. Even though I was a barber, hard to believe, no? I learned the art of fishing and created what some call the best green turtle soup in the world. I had some money, I knew something about business, and I started a turtle soup processing company in the Bahamas. I made the Bahamas my home for a little while, but eventually Key West, Florida in 1905. My misfortune in the turtle soup company was I partnered with the wrong individuals. Unscrupulous was my broker in Brooklyn, and my business, she was lost. A tale that has repeated itself in recent times, no? Afterwards, I salvaged what I could, and I moved to Biloxi in 1920. I resumed my profession as a barber and married Pauline Lemie, who lived on Deer Island, and I took up residence with her there. How beautiful and simple our island life was. I built a fine livelihood. I employed 20 shuckers. My wife and I had a beautiful home, which we lose to fire. We rebuilt, but sadly, my wife, she died. Good friends, you know what happens to homes built so close to water's edge. The hurricane of 1947 destroyed our house and oyster house. I rode out the storm on my beloved island clinging to a live oak tree, even though many on the mainland tried to persuade me to come ashore. After this, I built a one-room house and lived the rest of my life on the island with my dogs. In about 1954, Captain Louis Gonflot, who operates shrimp tour boat for tourists, came calling with a bottle of fine French wine. Who could resist such a gesture of friendship? We became instant friends. It was he who suggested we erect my pine tree mailbox for communication. He would retrieve my grocery list, Biloxi boys would gather my items, and Captain Louis would deliver my supplies and a newspaper. And what did I do for Captain Louis, you may ask? Well, I entertained his customers with song, story, and wit. And when I grew tired of the tourists, he pointed me out to them, and I waved from the island. Bon Dieu, my island, a true beauty, the true love of my life. Long before I inhabited her 400 acres, Indians roamed her shore. My fellow countrymen claimed this land in the name of France. It was they who named her Deer Island, because of the deer living there. The French make friends with the Biloxi Indians who live nearby. The Biloxi Indians hunted my beloved island. Through the years, the island's been homes for many beside myself. Captain Ralph Baker, he owned much of it, and his family members lived there for many years. Ay, I done got old, and I passed from this life in 1959 at the age of 81. Some 10 years later, Hurricane Camille destroyed what's left of the island. In 2002, the state of Mississippi acquired much of the island, and it became part of the Coastal Preserve Program, ensuring its beauty for future generations. Au revoir, bons amis. I wasn't a Biloxian by birth, but I was a Biloxian by choice. I couldn't resist her siren call. Pleased to make your acquaintance. I am Judge Walter White, a native of Rankin County, born in 1854 and educated therein. Law was my chosen field, and I studied under one of the best and the brightest of my day, Anselm J. McLaurin. He would become the 34th governor of this great state. I practiced law in Rankin County and Smith County. While still a student, I met and married Julia Harriet Enox, the daughter of Captain Isaac Enox and Julia Harriet Bird of Hines County. That gracious lady was the mother of my 4 daughters, Cora, Lula, Laura, and Nell. We were blessed with a short but happy union, and after only 10 years of marriage, Julia left the world in 1887. Captain and Mrs. Enoch again became my in-laws when I married Julia's younger sister, Cora, in 1889. Cora had been educated at Whitworth College in Brandon, Mississippi.
I was grateful for the opportunity to raise the family that Walter began with my sister. When he suggested Biloxi for a honeymoon, I became enchanted with its beauty. My love affair with the Gulf Coast had begun. By 1890, Walter moved his law practice to Biloxi, along with our large and ever-growing family.
After living in the Palmer House for a year or so, we moved to Magnolia Street. My law practice was up and running on Howard Avenue, just in between Lemuse and Main. But it wasn't long before our first real house was finished and ready for us. It was located on Beach Boulevard, the former site of Gornflow's Oyster Company, which had been destroyed by a hurricane. The year was 1894, and I was just beginning to realize that I had married a woman of vision.
The house was a palace, far too large even for our big family. Walter and I had been blessed with sons, Walter and Harry. Unfortunately, Harry's time with us was so very short, and even though the children kept me busy enough, I needed a distraction. I began taking in boarders in 1899, and by 1901, I gave birth to our 3rd child, John. Through all the ups and downs of daily life, a dream began to develop deep in my heart. Perhaps it was waking up to the beauty of the Mexican Sea every morning, but the reality of Biloxi's potential was a whisper in my heart, one I just couldn't ignore. Biloxi was a vacation spot waiting for the world to discover, and I was going to lead the world to her.
In 1903, we acquired a large tract of land north of our home and several surrounding houses. By 1906, Cora was advertising in the Daily Herald and Times-Picayune for guests.
The ad read, "The White House Hotel, West End Beach, Biloxi, Mississippi. Beautiful, large grounds on the beach and electric car line. Boating, fishing, good food, good beds, modern conveniences. Cottage for families make the accommodation ideal for the seashore. Rates, $8 to $12 per week. Mrs. Cora White, proprietress." I was beside myself with excitement.
Cora's thinking was ahead of her time. She didn't create just a hotel, but a full-fledged resort with amenities that only the finest hotel of the day boasted. Tennis courts, stables,
Charter fishing and sailing. Why, we hired Captain Freddie Dugan for our charter captain. Our guests raved about the sport fishing, and they raved even more when we served the fresh catch up for dinner in our dining room. We hosted dances and parties and weddings in the grand ballroom, and we hired the finest bands from New Orleans. And the food, well, I knew that view thrilled our guests, but the food, that's what kept them coming back.
We had our own farm and our own dairy, which our son-in-law A.J. Watson ran. In her original brochure, sent all over the U.S., Cora declared, when you plan your vacation, whether it's summer or winter, do not fail to carefully consider the many advantages Biloxi offers. And lastly, the home comfort, good cooking, and southern hospitality afforded by the management of the White House.
Between 1910 and 1929, the hotel was added to and remodeled. It began to take shape into the White House Hotel that most Biloxians would recognize today. The contract for the 1928 edition totaled $152,000. We could now entice our visitors with a 27-hole golf course north of the hotel and a Tom Thumb course right on the grounds. With the expansion came a 150-foot front porch, a total of 145 rooms, and a 3-story atrium in the large, expansive lobby. Some of our more high-end amenities included a gentleman's smoking room, a barber and beauty shop, and a Grand's drugstore right in our hotel for our guests' convenience.
Our sons, Walter and John, joined their mother in running our family business. It was they who oversaw the expansion of 1928. Prominent architect George B. Rogers, who also designed Alabama's Bellingraph Garden House, designed our colonial annexes, with featured private tiled baths in each guest room.
Go ahead, darling. Tell them about your ingenious contribution. Frankly, I'd say it was the calling card of the White House Hotel.
I traveled to Lynn, Massachusetts on business and had the opportunity to tour the General Electric plant. I was intrigued and captivated by a beautiful fountain with colorful lights and cascading sprays of water.
He came back home with the plans in hand.
We built our fountain right next to the White House Dance Pavilion, which was located in front of the hotel but near the Mexican Sea. Thousands crowded the beachfront on July 17, 1926 to witness the colorful columns of water that could spray up to 40 feet.
We timed with the unveiling of the fountain with the weekly Saturday evening summer dance, which we held for years. The fountain quickly became the spot for Biloxi bathing beauties to pose for pictures, and also a very romantic addition for the couples who danced cheek to cheek at the pavilion.
It was wonderful, wasn't it? Such wonderful memories. I was so proud of you, my darling. You're a woman ahead of your time. Your drive and vision helped the era of Biloxi's role as a Riviera of the South. Your work with the Chamber of Commerce and tourism leaders helped initiate Biloxi's evolution from fishing village to vacation haven.
Without your belief in me, your complete trust and backing it, all of it would have been just a dream. We sold the hotel in 1932, and I passed just a short 2 years later. After 35 years of practicing law and 15 years on the bench, Judge White passed in 1942. And the grand lady? Why, she's as proud and beautiful as ever, still welcoming visitors to indulge in the beauty that is Biloxi.
Strange to tell, among this orphan lot, some could articulate and others not. Suddenly one more impatient cried, "Who is the potter, pray, and who is the pot?" Well, Mark Cayenne must have been a potter to have written this. And it was the day that I felt the same exact sensation. Where did I end and the pot begin? We were as one. To create something where there was once nothing is the single most satisfying experience in life. Didn't the Almighty reach down, scrape the earth, spit in it, and create Adam? I'm Joseph Fortune Meyer. In your day, I'm remembered as the foundation of all Gulf Coast pottery. In my day, I was simply following the footsteps of my father, Francois Myers, who was Alsatian by birth and came from a long line of European potters. Papa came to America in 1848, just before my first birthday. Mama and I remained in Comp. He would send for us once he had settled. He first tried Philadelphia, then Pittsburgh, and last found Biloxi. Mama, my sister, and I arrived in Biloxi in 1857. Papa had opened a grocery and pottery store in the Back Bay, and he was very glad to see us arrive in Biloxi. He sent me to school where I got an average boy's education. He began to teach me to be a potter and share with me his discovery that the mud of the Schuylkill River was perfect for throwing pots. Papa would take me clay hunting along the river and taught me how to use the potter's wheel. He was very proud of what he called natural talent. In about 1860, a hurricane struck Biloxi, and our store came apart. Pottery was strewn from one end of the bay to the other. We had to start all over. We were ruined. It was about this time that Papa was stricken with rheumatism, which greatly hampered his work. Then the Civil War came on and killed his business entirely. Our family had a hard time getting along, and we even went hungry. We raised corn and chickens to live on, and there was plenty of game in the woods too, but not plenty of ammunition because it was needed by the Confederate soldiers. Now, as far as I can remember, the Yankees never attacked Biloxi. They did use Ship Island as a concentration place and assembled all their forces there. Men who did not wish to fight or had scruples against it fled to Biloxi and hired a boat to take them across to Ship Island. As a boy, I earned over $50 carrying over 3 men to the island. I had a hard time rowing back, but I made it. Papa found work in New Orleans, and I would join him as soon as I could. He was hired to make pottery in City Park in an old milk stable. We would sell his pottery in the French market. Papa died in 1870, and I continued our work. Shortly after I lost my father, I married Felicia Pinu and invited my boyhood friend George Orr to come and learn the art of throwing pots. He would be my apprentice for 2 years. It became clear even then that the student would surpass the teacher. After his apprenticeship, George traveled the country visiting different potteries. Simultaneously, I was courted by local art professors to build a ceramics facility for the New Orleans potter. This would be the beginning of the Newcomb Art Pottery, which today is considered one of the most significant American art facilities in the first half of the 20th century. George came back and worked 2 years with me at the Newcomb. Then he returned to Biloxi where he opened his now legendary pottery. I miss my friend. George was, how you might say, bigger than life. During my years at the Newcomb, I entered my pottery into international fairs that were popular during the early part of the 1900s. I was awarded the silver medal at the Pan American Exposition in Buffalo, New York, and again in 1904 at the Louisiana Purchase Centennial Exposition in St. Louis. However, at the 1915 Panama Pacific International Exposition in San Francisco, the Newcomb College Art Pottery took the grand prize. What a proud moment indeed. My wife Felicia and I actually moved back to Biloxi for a while. We lived in a house on Deary Island and even took in boarders. My dear friend, the Mad Potter Biloxi, passed from this life in 1918, and his wheel was sold to a young potter of promise who called on me for instruction and advice. Peter Anderson and his Shearwater Pottery of Ocean Springs are legendary now too. It wasn't long before my work began calling to me again, and I returned to the Newcomb, but this time my eyesight and health began failing me. I logged over 30 years in New Orleans, throwing pots and teaching the arts. My Felicia died, and our adopted daughter and her son took me in to live with them on Felicity Street in New Orleans. My express wish was to return to Biloxi upon my death, which occurred in 1931. My body was returned to Biloxi by L&N rail car. Father Kennan with Nativity Parish met the train and escorted me to this beautiful final resting place, my beloved Biloxi, where the pottery and I became one. Came to Biloxi in 1880 and took a job as a clerk in the mercantile business. After some hard work, I was able to open my own grocery store on Pass Christian Road. In 1883, I became part of a group of men that started Biloxi Volunteer Fire Company No. 1. This volunteer fire company would be Biloxi's first line of defense in the event of a fire. I became the chief engineer for the fire department and held the post of foreman for Volunteer Fire Company No. 1. Our motto was true to the call. Our lads were brave, unselfish, and very true to the call. Pardon me, I'm getting ahead of myself. Guess that's the old politician in me. I'm Edward Glennon, and I was born in New Orleans in 1854. My father and mother were James and Ann Glennon, hard-working Irish immigrants. Our family was a poor working class family, but we never went hungry. As a lad in New Orleans, I worked for Philip McCabe's Stove Company. I also learned the art of making tinware, and if I may say so myself, I became quite the skilled tinner. My grocery store was located on the south side of Pass Christian Road, just west of Main Street. Some years later, the Masonic Lodge was built just east of me and on the corner. In the back room of my store, I practiced my art as a tinner and sold my tinware creations in my store. I met Mary Colbert in Biloxi, and we were married in 1884. Mary and I would have 5 children: Frances, Roy, Ethel, Violet, and Mabel. In 1885, I began my career in politics when I became treasurer for the city of Biloxi. I would serve in this position for 9 years. During this time, Louis Gill and I joined forces as bail bondsmen for the city of Biloxi. I was first elected to serve as mayor in 1895 to 1896. During my term, I passed Ordinance 28 against prostitution with a $10 fine for anyone found guilty. In August of 1896, Louis Gill and I bonded out 3 ladies arrested, convicted, and fined under Ordinance 28. Sweet Mother of Jesus and all the little archangels, you'd have swore I patronized this house. The Law and Order League called for my impeachment. I was shocked to see the Biloxi Herald use the word brothel, such beer parlor language, over 3 infamous women. My actions were just business, not politics. From 1897 to 1907, I would hold the office of either Alderman at Large or Alderman of Ward 2. I was elected mayor and served my second term from 1907 to 1908. In 1911, I was elected mayor for the 3rd time and would hold that office till 1918. As mayor, on many occasions, I had to deal with the eccentric. One sunny Sunday morning in 1912, 2 young ladies removed their shoes and socks and dipped their feet in the Mexican Sea. A local lawyer and a very religious man took it upon himself to lecture and threaten the young ladies with legal action. These young ladies were part of a company of entertainers. Their manager called on me. I assured him that no ordinance or law or custom had been broken. In fact, I told him the young ladies could continue their waiting. While attending this witty and humorous musical, one of the actors yelled out, "Take your feet out of my ocean." A clever bit of comedy that brought about roaring laughter and applause. Tragedy struck my family in 1914 when Mary and I lost our eldest son, Francis, after a long illness. After my last term as mayor, I continued to be active in Biloxi's political and civic organizations. I was instrumental in the organization of the Merchants and Manufacturing Association, the Biloxi Light Company, the Bank of Biloxi, and the People's Bank. I passed from this life on December the 17th, 1933. 5 years later, my sweet wife, Mary, was laid to rest beside me. Until the day I passed, I took great pride in my involvement in the business, political, and civic community in my beloved Biloxi. I'm Jean Chevalier Delaunay, a native of France. I was a master carpenter by trade and could read and write, which gave me a distinct advantage in life. I arrived in Philadelphia in 1801, made my way to New Orleans by 1819, and later to Biloxi in 1820. Biloxi's sea breezes and natural beauty enchanted me. I immediately recognized her potential. Surely many New Orleanians would want to vacation in Biloxi, no? The businessman in me was intrigued.
I am Cora Enox White, originally of Hinds County. I arrived in beautiful Biloxi in 1890 as a new bride. I married Walter White, a lawyer who would eventually become a prominent judge here on the Mississippi Gulf Coast. That man built me a mansion with a view of the Mexican Sea that was beyond compare. And after a few summers of hosting both my large family and Walter's large family, I realized that our home was an ideal vacation rental, perhaps even a hotel. The businesswoman in me was intrigued.
I'm Anthony Tony Ragusan. I was born here in Biloxi in 1902, the son of an immigrant Yugoslavian fisherman. Our people made an enormous contribution to the burgeoning seafood industry here in Biloxi. Men, like my father, helped build Biloxi into the seafood capital of the world. Now, I was only 8 when my father died from a mortal wound received from a stingray. And by 9 years of age, I was working in the seafood factories, earning just a few what we used to call shrimp nickels for a full day's labor. These early times were hard, but they made me strong, and they helped make me determined to make Biloxi, the city of my father's choosing, into a better place for all of us. The native son in me was intrigued.
The Biloxi of my day had no hotel, and there was no beach road, just a trail where your present-day Highway 90 would eventually exist. The town was really just a small village comprised of fishermen, farmers, and craftsmen. Most commerce took place by way of trade or barter. I was residing in New Orleans, a busy port city already experiencing some industrialization. My children attended schools, but none existed in Biloxi. Upon my first scouting visit here, I found a tract of land ripe for development of vacation rentals, possibly something like cottages. I purchased the land, which fronted the beach for 600 feet and extended more than a mile northward. It was located between what is now Lemue's and Rue Magnolia Street. Paid $800 in gold. Was I a visionary or a fool? Only time would tell.
Well, once I convinced Walter that our home was far too large, even for our own large family, I began to take in boarders. I loved preparing breakfast for our guests each morning. And call it a hunch or an intuition, but I just knew that there was so much more potential to the White House, as we took to calling it. And I realized that Biloxi's identity as an ideal vacation spot was at hand, and I was going to have a part in leading the world to her door. Now, upon my urging, Walter purchased a large tract of land just north of our home and several surrounding houses. By 1906, I began advertising for guests in both the Daily Herald and the New Orleans Times-Picayune. The ad read, "The White House Hotel, West End Beach, Biloxi, Mississippi. Beautiful large grounds on the beach, an electric car line, boating, fishing, good food, good beds, modern convenience. expenses. Cottages for families make the accommodations ideal for the seashore. Rates $8 to $12 per week. Mrs. Cora White, proprietress. Ooh, I was so excited. Was I a visionary or a fool? Only time would tell.
As a young man, I demonstrated talent very early for writing and for drawing. And before long, I was working as a writer for our local newspaper, the Daily Herald. But soon, my stories were being published nationally in major publications like the Saturday Evening Post, Life magazine, and National Geographic. I became an avid photographer at this time, and soon the photos I took of life here in Biloxi were used to illustrate or to document the stories I wrote. My pictures of such local cultural events as the blessing of the fleet frequently accompanied the articles I sent out over the wires of the Associated Press. If I had to choose a theme to define the body of my work as a writer and photographer, I guess it would be something like Greetings from Biloxi, the jewel of the deep South. You see, I was certain people would come to Biloxi if they just knew about it. Was I a visionary or a fool? Only time would tell.
Before moving from New Orleans to Biloxi, my wife passed and she was laid to rest in New Orleans. I relocated my family to Biloxi so I could work on developing my lands. I was one of a few people who could read and write, so I became a notary public, a very prestigious position. On the land I purchased, I built 12 or so Creole-style cottages, small, well-built buildings, large enough to accommodate a family of 4. I advertised in the Times-Picayune, enticing wealthy New Orleanians to Biloxi with imageries of seaside rooms, sailing, swimming, and fishing. Voila, it worked. I kept my cottages rented, became a businessman, and eventually a hotelier. I tried marriage again, but was unsuccessful. I spent the remainder of my life managing my properties and enjoying my children and grandchildren. I lived a life of distinction in Biloxi, and even though it was not my birthplace, it was my home. I lived a life of distinction in Biloxi, and even though it was not my birthplace, it was my home. One of my cottages became the first permanent free library in the state of Mississippi in 1905. It has survived numerous hurricanes and remains in use for the city of Biloxi to this day. There's a street in Biloxi named for my descendants and me, and tourism, it's Biloxi's #1 industry. Now the world comes to Biloxi.
Walter and I turned the White House into not just any hotel, but a full-fledged resort with amenities that only the finest hotels of the day could boast. We had stables and tennis courts, and we hosted parties and dances and weddings in our grand ballroom, and we hired only the finest bands from New Orleans. And the food, well, I knew that our view bewitched our guests, but the food, that's what kept them coming back. We even had our own farm and our own dairy. In one brochure I wrote, when you plan your vacation, whether it be summer or winter, do not fail to carefully consider the many advantages Biloxi offers, and lastly, the home comforts, good cooking, and Southern hospitality afforded by the management at the White House. Now, between 1910 and 1929, the hotel was added to and remodeled. It began to take shape into the White House that most Biloxians would recognize today. And then Walter got the idea for the water fountain after he took a trip to Massachusetts where he toured the General Electric plant. He was intrigued by a beautiful fountain that had colorful lights and cascading waters. He came back to Biloxi with the plans in hand. And today, that water fountain is a true Biloxi landmark. And the White House, Well, she has been refurbished and brought into a new era of Biloxi tourism after several derelict decades. Why, there's even a restaurant named after me. Have you been to Cora's? Why, it's just one of the many reasons the world now comes to Biloxi.
Because of the many stories and articles and photographs that I wrote and published, and the nationwide attention and publicity that they focused on the city of Biloxi, in 1922, I was elected the first head of Biloxi's Chamber of Commerce. And I held that position for 45 years until 1967. The only time I was away from the chamber was during World War II and the Korean conflict, when I served our country as a military intelligence officer. Now, during this time, I became privy to some information that the Army Air Corps wanted to build a new training facility and was looking for a location. Well, I immediately launched into action and began lobbying everybody I knew to tell them about the advantages that I thought the city of Biloxi could offer for such a facility. I even made a trip to Washington, D.C. in this effort, armed with maps and a dossier full of information about the city and the area. I talked with everyone I could find who would listen and stand still long enough, and gave them my most convincing arguments about why Biloxi should be chosen for the site of this new facility. These arguments and debates were frequently carried out over many of the dinners, the boiled shrimp and crab dinners, that I hosted over at the chamber. Finally, after 7 long months of intense negotiations, the city of Biloxi and the federal government signed an agreement, and in 1941, Keesler Field, no longer a dream, became a reality. And Keesler has been a major part of the city of Biloxi's life for the past 76 years. Now, some people say that I put Biloxi on the map. Well, shucks, Biloxi was always on the map. I just helped give people a reason for coming here. You see, when you live in a place as beautiful and as historic as our city, it would have been a sin to keep it a secret all to ourselves. I've been called Mr. Biloxi. Now, there's a legacy I can get behind and enjoy, because now the whole world comes to Biloxi.
Now the world comes to Biloxi.
One nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Did you know that the Pledge of Allegiance did not originally include the phrase, under God? I wager you didn't know it was added in 1954 when the Knights of Columbus made a motion to add the phrase to our pledge. President Eisenhower signed the addition into law. Quite coincidental, isn't it, when we take into account that the Knights of Columbus are so named for Christopher Columbus, and the Pledge of Allegiance was written in 1892 to honor the 400th anniversary of Columbus landing in the New World. You see, I know a good bit about Knights history. I was one of 9 men from Nativity Parish who organized Chapter 1244 here in Biloxi in 1907. And I was initiated as a first-degree Knight along with 64 others. I was a devout and faithful parishioner for Nativity of the Blessed Virgin Mary Parish, the very first parish in the state of Mississippi to receive its own Knights of Columbus charter. The Knights were born in 1882 under Father Michael McGivney in New Haven, Connecticut, and it was immediately decided that its fourfold mission would be charity, unity, fraternity, and patriotism. It was quite fitting that Biloxi would be first in the state to have a Knights organization, as it is also the site of the very first Catholic Mass on the shores of the Gulf of Mexico in 1699. I am Albert Duquette, born in 1881, the eldest child and son of W.K.M. and Linda Duquette. He is remembered as the father of Biloxi's seafood industry. I also have the distinction of being the third king of Biloxi Mardi Gras in 1914. I married Karina Desport, daughter of Captain Ernest Desport, at whose grave we now stand. My father-in-law was a great ambassador for Biloxi and wrote extensively on Biloxi's history. Karina and I were blessed with 4 children, William, Marjorie, Eula, and Albert Jr. I, like my father, was a businessman. His success afforded me an education at the Mississippi A&M College and the Soule School of New Orleans. His success afforded me travel, at home and abroad. After my education, I managed several of father's seafood processing plants, both in Biloxi and in Louisiana. I was involved in numerous civic organizations, school and bank boards, and was the Biloxi Chamber of Commerce president. But my most rewarding work, I think, was for Nativity Parish in the Knights of Columbus. The very first induction ceremony of Knights was held at the Duque Theater, now known as Bank Corps South. In the early days of the organization, I traveled to many Knights conferences and conventions in places like New Orleans, Colorado Springs, Boston, and Washington, D.C. My youngest son and namesake, he was very special. Smart, handsome, fun-loving. In my eyes, he was the perfect son. I had such high hopes of serving the Knights with him as father and son, but that would never be. He entered World War II, March of 1943 as a bomber pilot in the U.S. Army Air Corps. August the 1st the same year, Albert went missing in action. Day by day, hour by hour, minute by minute, we waited for word. With each passing hour, I could feel the life leaving my own body.
Just 2 months and 8 days later, my father died of a terribly broken heart. Yes, that's a real ailment. He had fallen into a deep depression and was inconsolable. A year later, word reached Mother that I had entered the city of Rome the day the Allies arrived. I was alive. You see, I'd flown the B-24 Liberator bomber and survived a crash in the now famous Ploiești, Romania raid, only to be captured and become a prisoner of war and serve in 2 different camps. One of them was a Nazi camp, where I survived on a single bowl of rice per day and watched many others die of starvation. In the end, another soldier and I made a daring escape. For bravery, I was awarded the Flying Cross, the Air Medal, and the Purple Heart. The cost of freedom is steep indeed. Never forget those who have suffered and died for our freedom. John chapter 15, verse 13 says it best, "Greater love hath no man than this, that a man should lay down his life for his friends."